The air in the Seoul ballroom was thick with the scent of lilies and cold judgment. Nia Carter stood at the center of the gilded circle, her mahogany skin glowing against her silk gown, her hand resting instinctively over her 4-month baby bump. She was the only splash of warmth in a room of monochrome suits and icy stares. Min-Jae, the heir to the most dangerous empire in Asia, didn't care who was watching. He dropped to one knee, the diamond in his hand catching the light like a jagged shard of ice. Nia Carter, his voice was a low rasp, steady and defiant. Rule this world with me. The silence that followed was a physical weight until the rhythmic click-clock of heels shattered it. Madame Kong appeared like a specter of winter, her eyes piercing Nia with surgical precision. "A beautiful dream, Miss Carter," the matriarch whispered, her voice a blade wrapped in velvet. "But my grandson will not be born to a commoner. You are a guest in this house, Nia, never a member." Min-Jae stood, his hand gripping Nia's waist as the room erupted into a lethal, silent war. The ring on her finger didn't feel like a promise, it felt like a target. The transition from the ballroom to the Kong estate was seamless and silent, a blur of tinted windows and rain-slicked Seoul streets. Now, Nia stood in a bedroom that felt more like a museum exhibit than a home. The walls were a sterile, expensive cream, and the silk sheets on the king-size bed were cold to the touch. Nia paced the length of the Persian rug, her hand resting on the small of her back. She could hear the muffled footsteps of guards in the hallway, men who didn't look at her, only through her. Min-Jae had called it protection before he was pulled away by his father for an emergency briefing. To Nia, it felt like being buried alive in gold. "I'm a guest," she thought, the memory of Madame Kong's voice crawling down her spine like a spider. No, a guest can leave. A soft click at the balcony door made her heart lurch. A figure slipped through the heavy velvet curtains, smelling of rain and cheap cigarettes. "Tasha?" Nia gasped, her tension snapping into a moment of pure relief. "Keep it down, girl," Tasha hissed, shaking out her damp jacket. Her best friend looked wildly out of place against the minimalist decor. "I had to bribe a laundry driver and climb a trellis that definitely wasn't built for a woman of my carriage." Nia threw her arms around her. The familiar scent of Tasha's cocoa butter broke the spell of the Kong's sterile world. "How did you get past the perimeter?" "I've got skills, Nia. But listen," Tasha pulled back, her expression uncharacteristically grave. "I've been hanging around the staff entrance. These people aren't planning a wedding, honey. I overheard one of the drivers talking to the head of security. They aren't talking about the bride. They're talking about the vessel." Nia felt a phantom chill. "The vessel?" "They don't want you, Nia," Tasha whispered, her eyes darting to the heavy oak door. "They want that baby. The word is, once Noah is born, you're a ghost, a legal nightmare they'll pay to make disappear, or worse." Nia sank on the edge of the bed, her fingers curling into the expensive silk. She thought of Min-Jae's intense dark eyes, the way he looked at her like she was his only anchor. "Min-Jae wouldn't let that happen. He loves me." "He might, but he's one man against a centuries-old machine. You're in a gilded cage and the locks only turn from the outside." A sharp, rhythmic knock echoed through the room. Tasha dove behind the curtains just as the door swung open. Min-Jae stepped in, his tie loosened, his face a mask of exhaustion and simmering rage. He stopped when he saw Nia's pale face, his gaze immediately dropping to her trembling hands. "Nia, what's wrong?" He crossed the room in 3 strides, reaching for her. Nia looked up at him, searching the obsidian depths of his eyes for the man she loved, but all she could see behind him was the shadow of his mother standing in the doorway of her mind. "Am I ever going to leave this house, Min-Jae? Or is this just a very expensive waiting room for your heir?" Min-Jae's jaw tightened, his hand paused inches from her cheek. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed, a harsh, vibrating demand. He looked at the screen, and for the first time, he didn't look back at her before answering. "I have to go," he said shortly. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door, his silhouette framed by the cold light of the hallway. "Stay in the room, Nia. It's for your safety." The lock clicked into place from the outside. The afternoon light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the estate, casting long, cage-like shadows across the floor. Nia was staring at the garden below when the door opened. It wasn't the heavy tread of a guard or the hurried pace of Min-Jae. It was a soft, melodic rustle of silk. Han Su-min walked in as if she owned the air itself. The woman was the definition of perfect, a porcelain doll with a spine of steel, dressed in a muted lavender suit that screamed quiet luxury. She was the woman the Kongs had chosen for Min-Jae years ago. She was the woman Nia was supposed to replace. "It's a beautiful view, isn't it, Nia?" Su-min said, her voice smooth and light like a flute. She didn't wait for an invitation. She glided to the sideboard and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water. "Direct. I like that. It's a trait Min-Jae admires, though it will likely be your undoing here." She took a delicate sip, her gaze drifting over Nia's casual lounge clothes. "Do you know what happened this morning while you were resting in these expensive linens?" Min-Jae sat before the council, his uncles, the board members, the men who hold the keys to the Kong shipping ports. They told him that if he insists on this diversion, he loses his chairmanship, everything he has built, everything he is, stripped away. Nia felt a cold prickle of dread. Min-Jae can handle his family. Can he? Su-min tilted her head, a stray lock of dark hair falling perfectly into place. He's fighting a war on 2 fronts, Nia. He spends his days defending your presence to the wolves, and his nights trying to keep you from seeing the blood on his hands. He's losing his power, and in this world, a man without power is a dead man walking. Su-min stepped closer. The scent of her perfume, something expensive and clinical, filled Nia's lungs. "You think your love is a shield for him, but look at him when he comes home tonight. Look at the gray under his eyes. You are not his partner, Nia. You are his anchor, and you are pulling him straight to the bottom of the Han River." "You're lying," Nia whispered, though her heart began to hammer a frantic rhythm. "You just want him back." "I want the syndicate to survive," Su-min corrected coldly. "I don't need his heart, I need his position. If he stays with you, the Kongs will fracture. Is your ego worth his life? Is your romance worth bringing a child into a world where his father is a target because of his mother's pride?" Su-min set her glass down with a sharp clack. "Ask him about the Busan shipment tonight, Nia. Ask him why he had to give up 10% of the family's holdings just to keep the guards from dragging you out of this room." The door closed softly, leaving Nia in a silence that felt heavier than the walls of the estate. She looked down at her reflection in the glass of water. Was she the love of his life, or the weight that would eventually break him? When the sun finally set, casting the room in a bloody crimson hue, the lock turned. Min-Jae walked in, his coat over his arm, looking exactly as Su-min described, exhausted, drained, and dangerously fragile. "Nia," he murmured, reaching for her. She stepped back, her eyes searching his. "Min-Jae, tell me about Busan." The color drained from his face, and for the first time he looked away. The confrontation with Min-Jae had left a lingering frost in the room, but the morning brought a different kind of chill. A stony-faced maid appeared at dawn, gesturing for Nia to follow. They wound through the labyrinthine corridors of the estate, past Ming vases and ancestral portraits, until they reached a heavy mahogany door at the end of the north wing. The study was filled with the scent of old paper and expensive tobacco. Behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single ancient tree sat Kong Dae-hyun. Unlike Madame Kong's sharp theatrical cruelty, the patriarch of the family was a monolith of silence. He didn't look up from his ledger as Nia entered. He simply gestured to the leather chair across from him. Nia sat, her back straight, her hands folded over the life growing inside her. "My wife is a woman of passions," Dae-hyun said, his voice a low rhythmic rumble that felt like shifting tectonic plates. "I, however, prefer the clarity of ice." He finally looked up. His eyes were identical to Min-Jae's, but stripped of any warmth. He pushed a single slip of paper across the desk. "A blank check?" Nia wondered, her voice steadier than she felt. "Is this the part where you tell me I'm not worth the trouble I'm causing?" "On the contrary," Dae-hyun said, leaning back. "I am acknowledging your value. You are the mother of a Kong heir. That makes you a high-value asset, but assets are negotiable. This check represents your freedom, Miss Carter. A villa in the south of France, a penthouse in Manhattan, a life where no one looks at you with a silencer behind their back. All I require is that you leave tonight, alone." Nia looked at the check, then back at the man who ruled an empire built on shadows. "And the baby?" Nia asked, as casually as if discussing a business merger. "The child remains," he said. "He will be raised with the discipline and resources of his heritage. He will never want for anything. You, however, will be a ghost, a footnote in his history." Nia felt a surge of heat that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. It was the raw, primal instinct of a mother being told her child was a commodity. She thought of Min-Jae's tired eyes, the weight he was carrying, and the vessel Tasha had warned her about. "You think everything has a price, don't you?" Nia whispered. "In this world, Miss Carter, everything is a price," he countered. "Min-Jae is currently trading his future for your company. I am offering you a way to save him from himself." Nia reached out. Her fingers brushed the crisp paper of the check. For a second, the room went deathly silent. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, Nia gripped the edges of the check. Rip. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet study. She tore it again, and again, until the blank fortune was nothing but white confetti on the dark wood of the desk. "I'm not an asset," Nia said, standing up, "and my son isn't for sale. If you want to get rid of me, you're going to have to do more than sign a piece of paper." Dae-hun didn't flinch. He didn't even look angry. Instead, a tiny, terrifyingly sharp glint appeared in his eyes, a flicker of silent, dangerous respect. "My son has chosen a lioness," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "A pity. Lions are much harder to manage than sheep." He looked back down at his ledger, dismissing her. "The gods will escort you back to your room, Nia. Do try to enjoy the gardens today. The air is particularly heavy before a storm." As Nia walked out, her heart was thundering. She had won the moment, but as the heavy doors closed behind her, she realized she had just declared war on the only person in the house who might have been more dangerous than the queen. The storm Dae-hun promised arrived sooner than expected. That evening, a message was slid under her door. Not from Min-Jae, but from his right-hand man, Junho. "The medical van is ready for your checkup. We leave in 5 minutes. Be ready." The medical van was a rolling fortress, its windows opaque and its frame reinforced with steel. Nia sat in the back, the sterile scent of leather and disinfectant filling her lungs. Beside her, Junho, Min-Jae's most trusted lieutenant, stared fixedly at a bank of security monitors. He was a man of few words, his presence usually a comforting shadow of Min-Jae's authority. "Is the clinic private?" Nia asked, her voice echoing in the cramped space. "The best in Seoul, Miss Carter. Dr. Emily Grant has handled the family's private matters for a decade. You are safe." But as they pulled into the underground parking garage of the pristine glass and steel medical center, the safety felt brittle. The garage was too quiet, the fluorescent lights flickering with a rhythmic, nervous hum. Dr. Grant was waiting in a secluded wing, her face a mask of professional neutrality. The ultrasound room was dimmed, the only light coming from the monitor that would soon show Nia the flickering heartbeat of her son. "Lie back, Nia," the doctor murmured, her hands cold as she applied the gel. The rhythmic thump-thump, thump-thump filled the room. Nia's heart hitched. For a second, the syndicate, the blank checks, and the gilded cages vanished. There he was, a tiny, defiant pulse in a world that wanted to stifle him. "He's strong," Nia whispered, a tear tracing a path down her temple. "He is," Dr. Grant agreed, but her hand suddenly faltered. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to the monitor. "I'm sorry, Nia." "Sorry for—" The heavy door to the exam room hissed open. It wasn't Junho. 2 men in tactical gear, their faces obscured by balaclavas, stepped into the dim light. In their hands were not medical instruments, but sedative darts and zip ties. Nia scrambled to sit up, the cold gel smeared across her stomach.
"Junho!" she screamed. Silence followed, then the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor in the hallway. One of the men moved towards her, his movements clinical and terrifyingly efficient. "Don't struggle, Miss Carter. We are here to ensure the heir's relocation." "Relocation?" Nia's voice rose to a shriek. She grabbed a heavy metal tray of surgical tools, swinging it with a desperate, primal strength. The clatter of stainless steel hitting the floor was deafening. "I'm not an asset," Nia said, standing up, "and my son isn't for sale. If you want to get rid of me, you're going to have to do more than sign a piece of paper." A dozen days after that initial confrontation, Nia found herself in a similarly demanding audience. As Nia walked out, her heart was thundering. She had won the moment, but as the heavy doors closed behind her, she realized she had just declared war on the only person in the house who might have been more dangerous than the queen. The storm Daehan promised arrived sooner than expected. That evening, a message was slid under her door. Not from Min-Jae, but from his right-hand man, Junho. "The medical van is ready for your checkup. We leave in 5 minutes. Be ready." The medical van was a rolling fortress, its windows opaque and its frame reinforced with steel. Nia sat in the back, the sterile scent of leather and disinfectant filling her lungs. Beside her, Junho, Min-Jae's most trusted lieutenant, stared fixedly at a bank of security monitors. He was a man of few words, his presence usually a comforting shadow of Min-Jae's authority.
"Is the clinic private?" Nia asked, her voice echoing in the cramped space. "The best in Seoul, Miss Carter," Junho replied without looking at her. "Dr. Emily Grant has handled the family's private matters for a decade. You are safe." But as they pulled into the underground parking garage of the pristine glass and steel medical center, the safety felt brittle. The garage was too quiet, the fluorescent lights flickering with a rhythmic, nervous hum. Dr. Grant was waiting in a secluded wing, her face a mask of professional neutrality. The ultrasound room was dimmed, the only light coming from the monitor that would soon show Nia the flickering heartbeat of her son. "Lie back, Nia," the doctor murmured, her hands cold as she applied the gel. The rhythmic thump-thump, thump-thump filled the room. Nia's breath hitched. For a second, the syndicate, the blank checks, and the gilded cages vanished. There he was, a tiny, defiant pulse in a world that wanted to stifle him. "He's strong," Nia whispered, a tear tracing a path down her temple. "He is," Dr. Grant agreed, but her hand suddenly faltered. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to the monitor. "I'm sorry, Nia." "Sorry for—" The heavy door to the exam room hissed open. It wasn't Junho. 2 men in tactical gear, their faces obscured by balaclavas, stepped into the dim light. In their hands were not medical instruments, but sedative darts and zip ties. Nia scrambled to sit up, the cold gel smeared across her stomach. "Junho!" she screamed. Silence followed. Then the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor in the hallway. One of the men moved towards her, his movements clinical and terrifyingly efficient. "Don't struggle, Miss Carter. We are here to ensure the heir's relocation." "Relocation?" Nia's voice rose to a shriek. She grabbed a heavy metal tray of surgical tools, swinging it with a desperate primal strength. The clatter of stainless steel hitting the floor was deafening. "Get away from me!" She threw herself off the table, her bare feet hitting the cold tiles. She made it to the door just as a hand clamped over her mouth, the scent of latex and chemicals filling her senses. She bit down hard, tasting copper, and heard a muffled curse. Suddenly, the door was kicked off its hinges. A flashbang detonated, white light searing the room. Through the ringing in her ears, Nia saw a blur of motion. It was Junho, bloody, his suit jacket torn, but alive. He moved like a whirlwind of controlled violence, neutralizing the first man with a brutal strike to the throat and disarming the second before the man could draw a weapon. He grabbed Nia, pulling her behind the safety of his frame. "We have to move, now." "They tried to take him," Nia gasped, her hand clutching her belly as they sprinted towards the service elevator. "Junho, they weren't killing me. They were collecting me." "I know," Junho grunted, his eyes scanning the security cameras as the elevator doors closed. "Then who?" Junho looked at Nia, his expression a mix of pity and grim realization. The security codes used to bypass the clinic's jammer were registered to Madame Kong's private server.
Nia leaned against the cold metal wall, the adrenaline fading into a sickening, hollow clarity. The threat wasn't lurking in the shadows of Seoul. It was sitting at the dinner table. It was the woman who called herself a grandmother. As the elevator hit the garage level, Nia's fear calcified into something harder, something sharp. "They won't get another chance," she whispered, her eyes turning as cold as the ice Dae-hyun had described. "Take me back to the estate. I'm done hiding in the bedroom." The glass boardroom of the Kong headquarters overlooked the shimmering skyline of Seoul, but inside the air was suffocating. Min-Jae stood at the head of the long obsidian table, his knuckles white as he leaned over a stack of legal documents that would effectively strip him of his lineage. "Sign it, Min-Jae," Madame Kong said, her voice a calm ripple in the silence. She sat at the opposite end, flanked by the family's gray-haired advisors. "Choose the girl and walk out. Or stay, and we will ensure the child is raised with the dignity he deserves, without the destruction of a mother who doesn't belong." Min-Jae's eyes were red-shot, his jaw set in a line of pure agony. He picked up the pen, the weight of a century-old empire balanced on a single drop of ink. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the back of the room burst open. Nia stood there, her face pale and glistening with sweat. She was clutching the doorframe, her knuckles matching the ivory of her maternity dress. A sharp, guttural gasp escaped her lips, and she doubled over. "Nia!" Min-Jae dropped the pen, the expensive instrument clattering onto the hardwood floor as he sprinted towards her. "The clinic was just the beginning," Nia wheezed, her voice strained through a wave of white-hot pain. "It's time, Min-Jae. He's coming, now." The boardroom erupted. Advisors stood in shock, but Madame Kong remained seated, her eyes narrowing with a terrifying clinical precision. She didn't offer a hand. She checked her watch. "Call the private medical team to the executive suite." Madame Kong commanded the room, her voice cutting through the chaos. "The board meeting is stayed. The heir takes priority." The next 6 hours were a blur of cinematic agony and sterile light. Nia is ushered not to a hospital, but to a converted medical wing within the penthouse of the headquarters. It was a tactical event, not a birth. Nurses moved with the efficiency of soldiers, and the rhythmic beep of the fetal monitor felt like a ticking bomb. Don't let her take him." Nia gripped Min-Jae's hand, her nails drawing blood from his palm. "I'm right here," Min-Jae whispered, pressing his forehead against hers. "Push, Nia, just one more." With a final soul-shattering cry, the tension in the room snapped. The sound of a sharp, piercing wail filled the executive suite, the first cry of Noah Kong. The relief lasted exactly 3 seconds. As the lead nurse lifted the red, squalling infant, she didn't move towards Nia, she moved towards the door, where Madame Kong was waiting with a silk receiving blanket embroidered with the family crest. "Give him to me," the matriarch said, her arms outstretched like a velvet trap. "No!" Nia surged upward, her body screaming in protest. "Bring him to me. That's my son." The nurses hesitated, caught between the mother's primal scream and the matriarch's lethal authority. Min-Jae stepped into the path of the head nurse, his shadow falling over his mother. "Give the boy to his mother,"
Min-Jae commanded. His voice wasn't a request. It was the roar of a man who had finally stopped caring about his crown. Madame Kong's eyes flashed with a cold blue fire. "He is a Kong, Min-Jae. He belongs to the legacy. She has done her part. Let her rest, permanently." The security guards at the door shifted, their hands moving toward their holsters. The room was a powder keg, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and the high-stakes scent of a coup. The nurse, trembling, looked from the grandmother to the father and finally to Nia, whose eyes were burning with a ferocity that made even the guards pause. "Give him to me," Nia repeated, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. The nurse took a step toward Nia, and for a heartbeat it looked like the mother had won. But as Nia finally felt the warmth of her son against her chest, Madame Kong turned to her son with a chilling smile. "Congratulations, Min-Jae. You've chosen your side. I hope she's worth the war that starts tonight." The doors slammed shut, locking Nia and her newborn son inside the medical wing. Through the reinforced glass, Nia saw a fleet of black sedans pulling into the courtyard below. The vessel had delivered. Now the hunt was truly on.
The medical wing of the Kong headquarters was no longer a sanctuary. It was a high-tech dungeon. Noah's weight in Nia's arms felt like an anchor and a shield. He was small, warm, and entirely unaware that his very existence had just stripped his father of a kingdom. Min-Jae stood by the reinforced window, his silhouette a sharp, jagged line against the neon glow of Seoul. He hadn't spoken in an hour. Every time he moved, the holster beneath his tailored jacket shifted, a grim reminder that the board meeting had officially transitioned into a siege. "They think I'm a broken vessel, Min-Jae," Nia whispered, her voice rasping but steady. She looked down at Noah's tuft of dark hair. "Your mother thinks she can discard the wrapper once she has the gift." Min-Jae turned, his eyes softening only when they landed on her. "I won't let them touch you, Nia. I've doubled the floor security. Junho is at the elevators." "Security won't save us," Nia countered. She felt a cold, sharp clarity settling over her, displacing the exhaustion of labor. She reached for her bedside table, pulling out a burner phone Tasha had tucked into her overnight bag weeks ago. With a few taps, she pulled up an encrypted file, data she'd spent months quietly gathering every time she was resting in the estate. "What is that?" Min-Jae asked, stepping closer. "Choi Sung-ho," Nia said. "Your family's lead advisor, the man who just sat in that boardroom and voted to strip you of your title." She scrolled through a series of offshore bank statements and shell company registries. "He hasn't just been advising the Kongs, he's been bleeding them, millions of dollars diverted into private accounts in the Cayman Islands." Min-Jae leaned in, his brows knitting together as he scanned the numbers. "How did you get this?" "I'm a storyteller, Min-Jae. I know how to follow a narrative. And Sung-ho's narrative was too perfect. He was the one pushing hardest for my relocation because he knew once I was gone, he could manipulate a motherless heir and a grieving father." She looked at the door. "Bring him here now." 10 minutes later, Choi Sung-ho was ushered into the room by Junho. The advisor looked indignant, adjusting his silk tie. "Min-Jae, this is highly irregular. The council is still—" "Sit down, Choi," Nia interrupted. She didn't look up from her son. "I've been reading your biography, the one you didn't publish." She turned the phone screen toward him. As the advisor's eyes moved over the transactions, the color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. This is fabricated," he stammered. "It's authenticated," Nia corrected, her voice dropping to a lethal, quiet register. "And if I press send, it goes to Madame Kong. We both know how she handles betrayal. You'll be lucky if they only take your tongue." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft puffing breaths of the sleeping infant. "What do you want?" he whispered. Nia finally looked him in the eye. The vulnerable outsider was gone. In her place stood a woman who had survived the slums of her youth and the gilded traps of the elite. "I want my seat," Nia said. "You're going back to that boardroom. You're going to tell the council that the purity of the bloodline is irrelevant compared to the stability of the chair. You're going to advocate for Min-Jae's reinstatement with me as his legal partner and advisor." "They'll never accept it," he hissed. "They will if you tell them the alternative is a public scandal that will tank the Kong stock by 40% by morning." Nia leaned back against the pillows, her hand stroking Noah's cheek. "Now go, before I change my mind and call the police instead of your boss." As Choi scurried out, followed by a silent, impressed Junho, Min-Jae looked at Nia as if seeing her for the first time. He knelt by the bed, taking her hand. "You're a dangerous woman, Nia." "I'm a mother, Min-Jae," she corrected, her eyes flashing. But as the door closed, a shadow flickered on the security monitor. Madame Kong wasn't in the boardroom. She was standing in the dark hallway, watching the feed from a hidden camera, a slow, terrifying smile spreading across her face. She wasn't angry. She was hunting. The victory over Choi Sung-ho felt like a breath of oxygen in a vacuum, but the air in the Kong penthouse grew stale with a new, clinical kind of dread. By the next morning, the board had retreated, yet the silence from Madame Kong was louder than any shouting match. Nia sat in the velvet armchair, Noah asleep in a bassinet carved from dark cherry wood. She was watching the security monitors when the feed suddenly flickered to static. A moment later, the heavy oak doors opened. It wasn't a guard. It was a digital technician, followed by 2 men in suits Nia didn't recognize. They weren't Kong loyalists. They looked like federal investigators. Nia Carter, the lead man asked, his voice devoid of emotion. We have a warrant for your arrest, cyber espionage and the unauthorized leaking of classified corporate data. Nia stood, her heart plummeting. What are you talking about? I haven't leaked anything. The server logs say otherwise. A massive dump of the Kong Syndicate's private shipping manifests in offshore accounts was sent to the Seoul District Prosecutor's office 10 minutes ago from your personal device. Nia looked at the burner phone on the nightstand. It was gone. In its place was a decoy, identical in every way. I've been framed, Nia whispered, the walls of the penthouse feeling miles thick. The doors swung wider, and Madame Kong stepped into the room, her expression one of practiced, tragic disappointment. She looked like a grandmother mourning a wayward child, not the architect of a ruin. Nia, the matriarch sighed, the sound like a winter wind. I warned you that reality is harsher than dreams. To think you would try to burn the house down just because you couldn't own the keys. Min-Jae burst into the room, his coat disheveled, his eyes wild. He stepped between Nia and the investigators. This is a lie. She was with me all night. She didn't touch a computer. The digital signature is hers, Min-Jae, the matriarch said, her voice dropping to a lethal, motherly tone. She used the leverage she took from Choi to try and blackmail the entire council. When they refused, she hit send. She has endangered the lives of every man in this family, including yours, including the babies. The lead investigator stepped forward. Move aside, Mr. Kong. If she stays, she's a liability to the state. If she goes, we might be able to contain the damage. Madame Kong walked toward the bassinet, her silk robes whispering against the floor. She looked down at Noah, her shadow falling over the sleeping infant. The board has made their decision, Min-Jae, she said to Min-Jae, her eyes like twin daggers. You can remain the chairman, lead us through this scandal, and raise your son as a Kong, or you can stand by the woman who just signed our death warrants. She looked up at her son, her eyes like twin daggers. Execute the order, Min-Jae. Hand her over to the authorities or lose the empire. You have 60 seconds to choose, the mother or the legacy. The room went deadly silent. Nia looked at Min-Jae, seeing the impossible weight of the choice pressing down on his shoulders. If he chose her, he became a traitor to the syndicate, a man with a target on his back and no resources to protect their son. If she chose the empire, Nia would disappear into a black site prison, erased by the very system she had tried to navigate. Nia looked at Min-Jae. He looked at Noah. Then he turned to his mother. Slowly, he reached into his jacket. He didn't pull out a pen to sign her away. He pulled out his own encrypted communes device and dropped it on the floor, crushing it under the heel of his Italian leather shoe. The empire is already dead, Mother, Min-Jae said, his voice cold and final. Because a legacy that requires the sacrifice of a mother isn't a kingdom. It's a cult. He turned to the investigators, his hand moving to the small of Nia's back. You want to talk about leaks, talk to my lawyers, but if you touch her, you'll find out exactly how much legacy I'm willing to burn to keep her safe. He grabbed the bassinet with one hand and Nia with the other. We're leaving. You walk out that door and you are an outcast, Madame Kong hissed, her mask of grace finally shattering into a jagged snarl. You have nothing, no guards, no money, no name. I have my family, Min-Jae replied, stepping into the hallway. But as they reached the elevator, the lights turned red. The sirens of the building began to wail, not for the police, but for something far worse. Through the windows, a fleet of gray, unmarked SUVs roared into the courtyard, crashing through the security gates. A rival gang, sensing the internal fracture, had arrived to finish what the Kongs started. The elevator lurched and died, trapped between floors as the skyscraper's power grid groaned under a cyber attack. Red emergency lights bathed the small space in a rhythmic, bloody pulse. Noah began to cry, a thin, piercing sound that cut through the muffled roar of gunfire echoing from the lobby. They're here, Min-Jae whispered, his hand going to the suppressed pistol at his hip. The O-Sang Syndicate. They've been waiting for us to tear ourselves apart. He forced the doors open with a grunt of exertion, revealing the executive floor. The hallways were a war zone. Smoke from flashbangs swirled around the priceless art, and the air tasted of cordite. Stay behind me, Min-Jae commanded, But Nia gripped his arm, her eyes fierce. "We don't just run, Min-Jae. Your mother is still in the boardroom. If they kill her, the power vacuum will swallow us before we even reach the street." Min-Jae hesitated, the conflict clear on his face. His mother had tried to erase Nia, but she was the cornerstone of the empire. Without her, there was no ceasefire, only a hunt. "Junho, take the baby," Min-Jae barked, as his lieutenant slid into the hallway, clearing a corner with surgical precision. Nia handed Noah to Junho, her heart breaking as she felt the loss of his weight. "Keep him safe. If we don't make it, take him to Tasha." "I have him, Nia. Go," Junho promised, disappearing into the service stairwell. Nia and Min-Jae sprinted back toward the boardroom. They found the doors kicked in. Inside, Madame Kang was cornered behind her obsidian desk, two Osang assassins leveling their weapons at her. She looked smaller than Nia had ever seen her, a silver-haired woman facing the end of her reign with a cold, trembling dignity. Min-Jae didn't hesitate. He fired, two precise shots that dropped the first assassin. The second turned, his barrel swinging toward Min-Jae. "No!" Nia screamed. She didn't have a gun, but she had the heavy bronze dragon of the chair statuette she had grabbed from the pedestal in the hall. She swung it with every ounce of maternal rage she possessed, catching the assassin in the temple just as he pulled the trigger. The bullet grazed Min-Jae's shoulder, spinning him around, but the assassin slumped to the floor, unconscious. Silence fell, broken only by the distant sirens and the heavy breathing of the three survivors. Madame Kang looked from her bleeding son to Nia, who stood over the fallen man, the bronze dragon still clutched in her shaking, blood-streaked hands. "You saved me," Madame Kang whispered, her voice stripped of her velvet mask. "Why? I would have seen you in a cell by morning." Nia wiped a smudge of soot from her forehead, her gaze never wavering. "Because I'm not you. I don't destroy my family to protect my pride. And whether you like it or not, my son's blood is your blood. If you die tonight, the Kangs die with you. I'm playing for the long game, madam, and the long game needs a matriarch who owes me her life." For the first time in her life, Madame Kang was speechless. She looked at the woman she had dismissed as a commoner and saw a ruthlessness that mirrored her own, tempered by a grace she had long ago forgotten. "The police are 3 minutes out," Min-Jae grunted, clutching his shoulder. He looked at his mother. "Call off the frame job. Give Nia her life back, or I walk out of here and let the Osang finish what they started." Madame Kang looked at the carnage in her temple of power. She looked at the bronze dragon in Nia's hand. Slowly, she reached for her desk phone, the one line that hadn't been cut. "This is Madame Kang," she said, her voice regaining its icy authority. "Contact the prosecutor's office. There has been a clerical error regarding Miss Carter, and tell the security teams below, the heir has been found. We are unified." She hung up and looked at Nia. The ice in her eyes hadn't melted, but it had cracked. "You have your seat at the table, Nia, but don't think for a moment that this is over." "I don't expect it to be," Nia replied, her voice steady. "I'm just getting started." 1 year later, the scent of lilies in the Kang estate had been replaced by the crisp, clean aroma of sea salt and cedar. The grand ballroom, once a place of cold judgment, was now filled with the sound of laughter and the rhythmic clinking of crystal. Nia stood on the balcony, her silhouette framed by the glowing Seoul skyline. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk, her hair swept up in a regal crown of braids. Beside her, Noah, now a sturdy toddler with Min-Jae's obsidian eyes and Nia's defiant smile, reached for the shimmering lights of the city. "He has your curiosity," a voice murmured behind her. Min-Jae stepped out, looking younger than he had a year ago, the tension in his shoulders replaced by a quiet, earned authority. He wrapped an arm around Nia's waist, his hand lingering on the gold band on her finger, a ring that no longer felt like a shackle, but a seal of a new era. "And his grandmother's stubbornness," Nia joked softly, leaning into him. Across the terrace, Madame Kang sat in a high-backed chair. She was no longer the centerpiece of the room. She was a shadow in the corner, her power redirected to the countryside estate she now called home. She watched Noah with a gaze that was still sharp, but the ice had been replaced by a grudging, distant respect. She had kept her word. The charges were gone. The vessel narrative was buried, and Nia was legally recorded as the co-chair of the Kang Foundation. The board meeting went well today, Min-Jae said, his voice dropping to a private register. They're starting to realize that your storytelling approach to logistics is more profitable than their old-world intimidation. People follow leaders they believe in, Min-Jae, not just leaders they fear. We're building something that doesn't need a golden cage to survive. Tasha appeared from the buffet line, balancing a plate of hors d'oeuvres and a glass of champagne. She winked at Nia, a silent reminder of the nights they spent whispering in a locked bedroom. She was now the head of Nia's private security and communications, the eyes and ears that the syndicate never saw coming. The music shifted to a slow, elegant waltz. Min-Jae took Noah out of Nia's arms, handing him to a waiting, smiling Junho, and held out his hand to his wife. One dance, Director Carter? Nia took his hand, stepping into the light of the ballroom. As they moved together, the perfect Hansu men watched from the shadows, her expression unreadable, and the silent patriarch, Dae-hoon, raised a glass in a solitary, stone-faced toast. The war wasn't entirely over. In the world of the Kangs, it never truly was. There would be new rivals, fresh betrayals, and the constant weight of the crown. But as Nia looked into Min-Jae's eyes, she knew she wasn't just a guest in this house anymore. She was the architect of its future. The dragon's choice had been made, and the fire they had walked through hadn't consumed them. It had forged them into something unbreakable. Nia leaned in, her whisper lost to the music, but felt in his heart. We didn't just claim a seat at the table, Min-Jae. We built a new one. As the clock struck midnight, marking Noah's first birthday and the first year of their reign, the lights of Seoul burned bright, reflecting in the eyes of the woman who had turned a golden cage into a throne. The end.